Hello everyone, it's Cameron from Untitled Chapter. Today it's going to be a bit of a big video. It's going to be called Band Members Continuing Without Original Members. And what this is, it's a video discussing band members who have made it big for a long time, but suddenly they begin to change, but suddenly the old members go and new members come into the fold. Sometimes it can be a good thing, and sometimes not such a good thing. And there's loads of examples where it can be a good or bad thing. And there's going to be many, many examples throughout this video. And so this is basically what we're going to discuss. So one of the big examples I can think of is The Who. Now this is a big example, The Who. The Who started off in the 60s as just four guys: Roger Daltrey, Pete Townsend, John Entwistle and Keith Moon. And that lineup was that from 1964, 1965. But sadly in 1978 they lost their drummer Keith Moon from a drugs overdose, and The Who quickly the next day said they were going to carry on. They felt like that was what Keith would have wanted, and and they got in Kenny Jones, who'd been a drummer for the Small Faces in the 60s, and some fans didn't really think that Kenny was a good drummer. Some thought he was good, but a lot of people, especially Roger Daltrey, thought that Kenny just wasn't a great drummer. And I think Kenny's good, but he's not Keith Moon. He's not as good as Keith Moon. I think he's good, but he's not as good as Keith Moon. Of course, no other drummer can replace Keith Moon. It's as simple as that. But Kenny left after a few years, and then in 1990s they got in Zach Starkey, who is Ringo Starr's son. And Zach's been a good drummer. I think, Zach's a good drummer. And then sadly in 2002 their bassist John Entwistle sadly died, and then they got in Pino Palladino, who Pino Palladino has I think had worked with The Who on solo projects. I'm not quite sure, but he's also played with Simon and Garfunkel as well. He's a cool bassist. So yeah, The Who is a good example of how they've lost members and carried on. But sometimes when you lose a member, you may think you think it's not going to be the same, and you may decide not to carry on. And that is such an example with Led Zeppelin. Now Led Zeppelin were of course one of the most famous rock bands of all time, and they started off, they had four guys as well: Robert Plant, Jimmy Page, John Paul Jones and John Bonham on drums. And sadly in 1980 they lost John Bonham, and the band, I think, realised that John was such a huge force in Led Zeppelin that they'd lost, someone that was so unique, and they felt they couldn't really carry on, and so they decided to stop and call it a day, which was the right decision, to be honest. And I know a lot of fans felt like that. Then they had many reunions, and then before finally in 2007 they reunited and had Jason Bonham, John Bonham's son, on drums for a benefit concert at the O2 Arena in London. And since then there's not really been anything from Led Zeppelin. I think they did want to reunite, but I think there were politics reasons for that, and I don't really know the story. But Led Zeppelin have not reunited, and to be honest, would it really work out now when they had their peak in like the late 60s, early 70s, in like the 70s, would it really be as good? I don't know if it would be. That's all I can say. And sometimes, AC/DC is a great example. They've had many lineup changes. They lost their lead singer, tragically, Bon Scott, in 1918. They got in Brian Johnson, who the fans, I think, really accepted and welcomed. But over the years there's been many, many lineup changes. Like Phil Rudd, the drummer, got replaced a couple of times. Brian Johnson left and was replaced by Axl Rose, which to many was a joke. But Brian, I think, did come back. But sadly Malcolm left because of his health. But AC/DC is another good example. And Van Halen, this is a great example. Van Halen started off just four guys: David Lee Roth, Eddie Van Halen, Michael Anthony and Alex Van Halen, who's Eddie's brother. And that was them in the night from the 1970 debut album until their 1984 album in 1984. And then in 1985, David Lee Roth left the band and pursued a solo career. And I think he did well with his solo career. And then they got in Sami Hagar, who had a career of his own at the time. Sami was a good singer, but David Lee Roth was just out there, He's just this amazing guy, Diamond Dave, as he's called. But Sami wasn't really... Some fans liked him and some didn't. And Sami was with the band from like the mid-80s till the mid-90s, and there was a lot of tension though between Sami Hagar and some bandmates. And then in 1998, Sami had left. I think a couple years before then they got in Gary Sharon, which to many he was not accepted by Van Halen fans. And then in 2004, I think Sami Hagar rejoined Van Halen for like a reunion tour to accompany a best of album. And since then, there's been a lot of tension. There was a lot of tension, and shortly after that, Sami Hagar left the band, and he's never played it with them again since. Neither has Michael Anthony, the bassist. David Lee Roth rejoined in 2007 for a sub tour, and David Lee Roth's been back with them since, and I think they've got Eddie Sun to play bass now. So Van Halen's been one of those examples where different lineups change, and sometimes it doesn't always go well, you know. But then there's like loads of lineup changes, like REO Speedwagon. That's a brilliant example. REO Speedwagon just started off with Terry Luttrell on lead vocals, Gary Richrath on lead guitar, Neil Doughty on keyboards, Greg Philbin on bass, and Alan Gratzer. Terry left after the first album, but they were trying to make it big. Some departures are okay because band members are trying to make it, and REO Speedwagon is an example. Then they're getting Kevin Cronin to replace Terry Luttrell, and Kevin, I think, is a brilliant lead singer. As much as Terry's a good vocalist, I think Kevin Cronin's a great lead singer, and Kevin's been with them the most. However, there was tension between Kevin and some of the bands, and eventually one day Kevin lost his voice. I think he had a throat problem, and on advice of the doctors, he wouldn't sing, and the band members did not take that well, and Kevin was dismissed from the band. Then they got in Mike Murphy, who I don't think is as good as Terry or Kevin. Then Mike left, and then they're getting Kevin back, which I think was a great idea. Then Greg Philbin left in 1977, and then 1977 they're getting Bruce Hall on bass, who I think was a great choice for the band. And that was where the classic era of REO Speedwagon begins. From 1978, You Can Tune a Piano but You Can't Tune a Fish, till 1984's Wheels Are Turning. There was Life As We Know It in 1987, but that wasn't as good as some of the previous ones. But then again, there was always, you know, members leaving or quitting. Alan Gratzer quit the band in 1988. He was tired of like touring. He was wanting to spend more time with his family, which is understandable. Gary Richrath eventually left in 1989. I think there'd been tension between him and Kevin, and it just boiled over. And then in 1989, 1990, they got in Brian Hitt on drums and David Matto on guitar, who have both been good choice, but both good, you know. But they're both good, you know. I think they're both great, you know, Brian and Dave. But some fans they don't agree. They're like, oh, there's like a tribute band now. It's not REO without Gary. Well, it's not the same as it was, but REO are still good though. So I'll say that. I know a lot of people are gonna, you know, not like what I've just said there, but I think, you know, I do like Dave Amato and Brian Hitt. I think they're great choices. And so REO Speedwagon there, that's a great example. Now, Foreigner. Foreigner is another example. Just four guys: Lou Gramm, Mick Jones, I think Al Greenwood, and Dennis Elliott on drums. I think with some of them, I can't remember, but Al Greenwood left in 1979, and then he got in Rick Willis, and that was where a classic lineup of Foreigner began. From Foreigner 4 in 1981 to Agent Provocateur, and then Inside Information 1987. However, I think Dennis left, so did Rick, and then Lou Gramm left in 1990. There was a lot of tension between him and Mick over like songwriting, which is often the case in some bands. There's always tension about creativeness. But he was replaced by some guy called Johnny, somebody, I can't remember his name, and he didn't really go down well with Foreigner fans. But Lou came back, and Lou got diagnosed with a brain tumor, and that really had an impact on his singing. And then in 2003, Lou left the band. Tensions between him and Mick, I think, had just got worse. Then they got in Kelly Hansen, and now Foreigner's a completely different lineup. And some people think, oh, it's not Foreigner without Lou. Well, it's not the same as it was, but again, I haven't really seen too much footage of like Kelly Hansen, and so I can't really say much on him. But I think Mick Jones is the only original member or foreigner that's still within the band. So I could be wrong, you know. And Fleetwood Mac, that's another great example. I mean, it was Peter Green's band to start with in the 60s, and then he left, and then they got in Christine McVie, and some other members quit in between before getting Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks, and that was where for many, a lot of people loved that era of Fleetwood Mac. But Fleetwood Mac, there was always tension within the band. In fact, a lot of the band members were married. John and Christine were married, Stevie and Lindsey were in a relationship, their marriages collapsed, but they still kept working, which was a good thing. But then in 1987, Lindsey left the band. He was replaced by two members. Then Lindsey came back, and there's always been like this friction between Lindsey and Stevie. You know, I just really don't understand how eventually in 2018 Lindsey left the band, and seemingly it's for good. It looks like that's for good. But yeah. But another thing, like if band members who carried on for years and then and then they lose a member and they stop. But the Beatles were four guys and they just carried on, and until 1970 till they split up. So that's not really an example. But Queen is a big discussion. They had four guys: Freddie Mercury, Brian May, Roger Taylor and John Deacon. Four great guys. And that lineup lasted from their first album in 1973 to 1991's Innuendo. So a good 18 years. And sadly in 1991 they lost Freddie Mercury, and that was a big loss to the music world. Freddie was this amazing performer, and that was just a huge loss. And then I think the members of the Queen thought that Freddie was the leader of the group, and they didn't have a leader anymore, so they couldn't really go on. And then John Deacon left, and then in the early 2000s they began touring with Paul Rodgers, calling it Queen and Paul Rodgers. And Paul Rodgers left, and now it's Queen and Adam Lambert. I think it's a good thing that Queen are still touring, but that brand name Queen, you know, the fact that Brian May and Roger Taylor are still touring as Queen, but it's and Adam Lambert, you know, to think that if Paul McCartney and Ringo Starr were to do something like that, you know, people think, well, I think it's a bit disrespectful. You're calling yourselves the Beatles when there's only two of you. But they'll say, we're the Beatles, and because they'll have probably got something to do with John Lennon and George Harrison, because they've both now passed away. I don't think that's going to work. I'm sorry, that'll never work. And the Rolling Stones, they're still touring, but they've had loads of lineup change. I mean, Brian Jones sadly died tragically in 1969. They got in Mick Taylor and then Ronnie Wood, and Bill Wyman left the band in 1992. So I think, you know, the Stones are still a good band. They're still, you know, a good band, even though not many of the original. Even though they still have Mick Jagger. They still have the two main ones, Mick Jagger and Keith Richards. So that's a good thing. They still have the two main ones, Mick and Keith. You know, because Mick and Keith are probably, you know, rock music's most famous musicians and performers. So yeah, those are loads of examples. And another example is Bruce Springsteen's band. Bruce Springsteen's had many personnel changes in his band. The E Street Band, you know, I mean, Vinnie Mad Dog Lopez and David L. Sanchez left the band, and they were replaced with Gary Talent was already in the band. They were replaced by Max Weinberg and Roy Bittan, both great choices. But they had like Clarence Clemens on saxophone, Danny Federici on organ and keyboards, and Gary Talent on bass. And then they got in Steve Van Zandt on guitar, and that was a perfect lineup. You know, from 1975 Born to Run until 1980's The River. Well, actually 1984 was Born in the USA, but Steve Van Zandt had left the band. He wasn't on that tour. He rejoined in 1999 though. Bruce sort of told the E Street Band in 1989 that their services wouldn't be required, but that would be for 10 years. In 1999 they reunited, and then they added in a violinist called Susie Tidal, or however you pronounce that. That's just a good lineup. And then tragically in 2008 they lost Danny Federici, and then he was replaced by Charles Giorandi or something. I don't know how you pronounce that surname. Apologies for my bad pronunciation, but I just don't know how to say some surnames. And of course, tragically, they lost Clarence Clemens in 2011. That was a big loss. And then they got in Jake Clemens, who was Clarence Clemens' nephew. And Jake and Charles, I think, have done good jobs within the band. I mean, I went to see Bruce in Hamden a few years ago, and he was still great. And Jake Clemens did a brilliant job following his uncle's footsteps. And I know many Bruce fans are like that. I know Clarence is missed, and it's not the same without him, but it's still Bruce. Bruce has always been great in whatever he's done, you know. Yeah, an example of a band that should not be carrying on is Peyton the Heartbreakers. Peyton the Heartbreakers underwent many lineup changes, but they still had like the main guys, Tom Petty and Mike Campbell, and I think Ben Montench was sort of a main guy. They had like Tom Petty, Mike Campbell, Ron Blair, Stan Lynch and Ben Montench. Ron Blair left in the 80s, they got in Howie Epstein, and Howie Epstein was a great, additional to the Heartbreakers, because he not only did he play bass, but he played harmony vocals for to sing along with Tom, and that was a brilliant choice. Stan was fired in 1993. I think him and Tom were not getting on, and Stan was wanting to be a rocker, whereas Tom was writing more softer melodic songs. Nothing wrong with that. I think they're great songs. But Stan was fired, and he got Steve Ferroni, and he added in Scott Thurston to play keyboard or guitar or something like that. Howie sadly left in 2002. I think due to personal problems. I think he was a heroin addict, and the Heartbreakers I think just were sort of struggling with him. And sadly they lost Howie in 2003, but Ron Blair came back. And tragically in October 2017 they lost Tom. And since then there's really been nothing from the Heartbreakers. I don't really think they should. I mean, I'm part of a Tom Petty fan group on Facebook, and many think that Stevie Nicks from Fleetwood Mac should join the Heartbreakers replacing Tom. No way, Jose, because that wouldn't work. Stevie Nicks has her own career. She can't. And as Tom always said, there were never any women within the Heartbreakers. Even though they sang about women, there were never any women in the Heartbreakers. But the thing is, like, Tom Petty was such a unique singer, unique writer. You just cannot replace that. You cannot replace that. When somebody who is an important part of a band goes, there's no way you can do it. There really is no way you can do it. But the fact is, you just cannot do that when you lose somebody that's unique as that and who's a strong figure. They lost Harry Epstein, but they carried on. But Tom was like the main songwriter and the main guy. When you lose the main guy, there's no way you can go on. Like, Queen couldn't go on without Freddie Mercury. So, to those who think Stevie Nicks should join Tom's band, the Heartbreakers, think again, because it will not happen. So, I could probably think of another example. To add on, when I saw the Who at the Hydro, I thought that the lineup was good. I was going to say this earlier, but I forgot to. When I saw the Who at the Hydro a few years ago, I thought the lineup was good. Obviously it wasn't the same without Keith and John, but I think the lineup the Who've had are good. So, is there any more to this? I think that's all I have to say. It was quite a long video, yeah, I hope you like this video. Like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you again next time.